amongst their own friends. So that's what makes it relatable. But the second is that all of us uniquely have a point of view about stuff that matters more and more in the world. I think that's just the basics of it. Like, it's not like technology is going away, and it's not like its impact in the world is going away. And the more it becomes mainstream, the more it's important for a lot of folks to understand what's happening. And I think we provide a pretty unfiltered view of it. And we do it where, and this is a lot of credit to Sachs more than anyone else on this show, has to take a counterpoint and steel man what would otherwise be controversial views. And if he didn't have his three friends around him, that would make the pod meaningfully worse, I think.
Can you explain for people who don't know what steel manning is, what that means?
Well, it just means like to have intellectual honesty around a point of view and actually put your best foot forward in trying to explain it, even when it's not orthodox, even when it's not what the mainstream would say is right. And so what it actually does is it creates a contrast against every other alternative that you have to learn about things, which you find incrementally is biased. And I think that's what we've gotten right. We are four friends that have a reasonable point of view rooted in some amount of success. And I think that that's important because it gives us credibility. And we take all sides of issues because the facts are known instantaneously on Twitter and through the internet. We don't need people to relay facts. We need people to wrap facts in context and allow us to come to our own conclusions. That's why I think journalism isn't what it used to be. That's why people who are historically journalists struggle, because now they actually have to create context and narrative and have an opinion. But when you publish that into the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, it becomes very confusing. They don't know that that's what they were supposed to do. That's not what they used to do. That's not how Pulitzer Prizes were historically given out. And that's why everybody then, rants and rails. You can't wrap a virtuous blanket around 1,000 people because of the acts of one. And to think that you and Friedberg almost blew this up over a few $100K over ourselves and our own egos, and we're still here. I think that takes a lot of courage and a little bit of maturity that's not in public visibility all the time in the media.
I like 3 days,
which is I think the load for Sachs, because he is the most heterodox, is the heaviest, and this is like poorly understood. It's easy to just basically be on the side of the current conventional wisdom, or to not have an opinion and to talk about things that are orthogonal. But David is consistently the one that wades into the middle of the ocean, and I can understand why you
find it
exhausting.
There.
No, because he
gets dragged under.
No, Jason, he has to be more prepared than the rest of us.
Yes,
because he is more open to the attacks from all of these nitwits, uninformed nitwits. They're the cancer. Are. The cancer of people who comment on Twitter is the following: they suffer from the worst kind of cancer, which is a lack of belief in themselves. And so what they do is they point to other people and try to convince yet more people to not believe in them. But that has nothing to do with anything. It's just misdirection from their core problem, which is they don't believe in themselves. And so, David has to fight all of that stuff off, but he has to fight it off with logic, which must be exhausting. My approach has just been to turn off comments and to not start. This is the single biggest problem, I think, with social media is it's at this heightened point where it's this virulent strain of a lack of belief in oneself that manifests in this hatred that you direct to anybody else that believes in themselves.
Interesting comment.
99% of people who comment have nothing important or useful or interesting to say. Like zero, like -0. And you forget that there's like 99.999% of the world that just reads your content and couldn't even care about their comments. All of the best performing funds of all times were the ones that were formed right in the middle of the downturns, 03, 08, 09. These are the vintages that have always been the best. And what that means, it's a proxy for investing, which is it's the hardest time right now. It's when you have the shakiest hand when you're writing the check, but it'll probably be where all of the real money is made, or the real generational wealth, both for the entrepreneurs who have the courage to start and the investors who have the courage to invest. There was a story that I heard in New York. I was talking to a really well-known hedge fund or family office, and they were talking about how they were meeting with a CEO of a fintech unicorn, very well-known fintech unicorn. And they said they left the meeting and they said, this person had an unbelievable disrespect for money. And it was the most arrogant interaction that they had ever heard. And they said, under no circumstances would we invest in this guy in this company at any price. And, lo and behold, a year later, that company is now visibly going through a bunch of hiccups. And it just reminds me that, Jason, we've always had two problems when times are good. The value, paper values into actual distributions, and that takes a skilled hand. And I think that a lot of young folks were hired into venture that fundamentally did not know what they were doing. They've neither ever built a company or helped build a company or actually learned how to generate returns. But they became very good at buying, free call options on companies. I remember like a lot of people, the way that these young people, I remember I heard a story that you would sell against Gurley, right? So let's just say you were trying to do a deal and Bill gives you a term sheet from Benchmark and you get, somebody else. The young folks were like, oh, Bill's too negative and he doesn't get it. And they would try to convince these entrepreneurs that, these rainy days don't happen. My experience with Gurley is he is the most sophisticated investor of our generation. And what I mean by that is, he was trained as an equity analyst that really understood business models and cost of capital. And so in a moment like this, the way that Gurley would help you on a board is meaningfully more important than how some, middling VP at some rando startup who's now a, junior partner at a venture firm, because that person has literally no clue. And so these companies are going to go through a very difficult moment, which again is the reason why being an indicator and a byproduct of what we do. There are moments when what we do reflects in value that frankly where we are over earning. And then there are periods where what we do is under reflected and we are under earning. And so the through line has to be that you need to survive in both good times and bad times, which means you got to like what you're doing. And if you get caught up in a numerical number, there's all kinds of math you can do to make it look a lot bigger than it is, but it's all meaningless.
Yeah, I would argue as long as you're actively developing yourself over time, the weighing machine will do its job.
Somebody told me in my 20s when I was at AOL, he said, if you're, because at the time I grew up on welfare, I thought the goal was to make money. I didn't know any better. I've learned later that there's a lot more leading indicators of happiness and things that actually create happiness. Are enormous beneficiaries of having been born when we were, because we were a bunch of late 40 and early 50 somethings that in the prime of our career 42. In tech, the Federal Reserve took rates to zero. And we had no idea a priori how important that would be in all of our outcomes, but they were.
And even more importantly, PCs, internet, and mobile happened.
All of that hard work was done beforehand by an entire cohort of people that had to fight much stronger headwinds than we had to fight. So, David, I just want to build on that. Like, we were extraordinarily lucky. And so don't get caught up in that because there's all these factors you cannot control.
I'll say